We have a paper jointly authored by Marx and Rene Clift from the University of Arizona.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for staying. This is the intrepid conference goers here at this hour. I want to preface before I start that the evidence that the Secretary used in negotiated rulemaking for why he wanted to use student financial aid as the lever is that the Title II reports that came from the states, you know how we do that, from the university to the states, and then the states assemble them and send them on. The evidence was that not enough teacher education programs had closed. And that's the evidence that we are not exercising authority over the quality of our programs in our states. Just a little editorial comment. So policy is a blood sport. And there's one way of thinking about policy from the university of doing analysis and trying to figure out who the actors are, and we've seen two really great presentations on that. But at the end of the day, it affects our daily work as teacher educators and in higher education. We are not immune to this. We're not just simply folks doing our work where the policy world does its work, and then maybe we can pay attention or maybe not. It's not like that, people. This is really a very consequential set of activities that go on. We are kind of alone. Nobody likes us. If you look at the Gallup poll over the last 3 decades, and if you look at the confidence that the public has in social institutions, all the social institutions of America have gone down since the 80s, every single one, including teachers and teacher education. So we don't have a lot of friends. And so the story you're going to hear from this paper is, how do you make friends? How do you live in this sea in a way to keep the sharks at bay? I don't know how many metaphors I can have in this one. I live in Arizona. You've seen Arizona a couple times today. I don't know, Sarah, why you use blue for the state of Arizona, but we have state law led to a court case on inflation funding for the K-12 sector. I won't go into it at great length, but basically the legislature was required by a voter initiative to fund inflation. They didn't fund inflation. They were sued. They lost the suit. So while the court case was being pursued, the fiscal year 16 budget was being assembled. And so what the state legislature said is that, well, we can give K-12 more money, but it has to come out of somewhere else. And so we'll take it out of higher ed. So they flatlined community colleges. So in the state of Arizona now, there is no state level support for community colleges at all. It's entirely funded by the local taxpayers. And they cut $99 million out of higher education. We've had about over a 40% cut since 2009 in the higher education budget in the state of Arizona. So that's really consequential. It's huge consequences when you lose that kind of money out of your budget. I have to put my glasses on here. So what does that mean? So we're living in this context. We've heard about it already. We've had now a decade and a half of federal policy from NCOB to RT, Race to the Top, that has had a huge impact on the way we behave and the way we act. The goal of that, of course, was to reduce achievement gaps and to increase the performance of kids in our schools. We don't have a lot of evidence that that has helped, but it has produced a tremendous amount of flotsam and jetsam that's sort of floating around in the political ether. So, for example, a common result of the kind of focus that we've had, and you've heard about it now both in the morning and this afternoon, is to blame teachers and then teacher ed. And the logic of this policy is that, represented by Secretary Duncan's idea about not closing enough poor teacher education programs. When I came to Arizona in 2003, the then Superintendent of Schools, Tom Horn, asked all the 3 state universities to produce more teachers. And the reason why he wanted more teachers coming out of the colleges of ed, this is 2003, before reductions in the number of people applying, was because he was following the Hanushek dictum. If you fire the bottom 5% and hire new people, you'll have a better teacher force. And so if you keep every year firing the bottom 5%, eventually you'll elevate the quality of teachers. So that was the logic model in the state. And the logic model that other states were following. Two things happened. One of them is to eviscerate the power of teachers. One place is to do that is to eviscerate the unions, and in particular, eliminate tenure. Eliminate teacher tenure, because that was a hard-fought, hard-won battle many, many, many decades ago. And so now in our state, as in many states, there's no such thing as teacher tenure. So that's one of the outcomes of it. And then, of course, as you've heard in these previous two presentations, if the teachers are ineffective, then somehow the teacher preparation programs must be ineffective as well, right? I mean, that's the logic, right? If we taught them and they're no good, then it's our fault that they're no good. So we've had these new market mechanisms that have been brought in, and the market mechanisms have been brought in at both the K-12 and the higher ed level. At the K-12 level, of course, we've had charter schools and voucher systems. From 1999 to 2012, the number of kids in charter schools went from 300,000 to 2.3 million. So it's become a very big enterprise. In our state, 10% of all the kids in K-12 schools are in charter schools. So charter schools has been, in effect, a very effective market mechanism to influence the K-12 sector. And then at higher education, we've had alternate teacher education programs. You've heard a lot about that. And inevitably, that has led to these horse races. And I've forgotten who this morning used that horse race story, Suzanne. Thank you for prefacing this. And this is like silly research. It's completely, utterly ridiculous research, but it's the kind of research that a lot of people pay attention to, particularly policymakers pay attention to it. And so, we're producing this research, and sure enough, we find out that there's more within variance than between variance. And so we can't really say very much about that. Suzanne was talking about that this morning. But maybe there have been some consequences. And maybe the consequences had been intended in the first place. I don't think that they were, because like Ken, I'm sort of optimistic about democratic institutions. But what might have been the outcomes of these kinds of neoliberal market forces? Milton Friedman is alive and well in education policy. Well, maybe what's happened with the accountability systems and all the other kinds of forces, the kind of the media that Ken was talking about, is that it's harder to retain our teachers. Rich Ingersoll has been doing this research for a long time now, and he shows with very strong data that teacher retention is really a big problem, much bigger problem than producing more teachers. Because if we produce more teachers who come into the field and leave in 3 or 4 years, then that's not a solution to anything. We keep on doing more and more and more of that, spend a lot of money on something that's not effectively going to reduce the problem. And then similarly, we had a slide here, but we don't know where we got it. So we dropped it out. You have to attribute. So, but at any rate, the reduction in teacher education enrollments over the last 5 years is just dramatic. And any of you in this auditorium who is involved in teacher preparation knows that. Maybe some institutions that are a little bit immune, but not very many. Everybody is suffering this consequence. And by the way, that slide would have shown that this is true of higher education-based, traditional teacher education, and alternate certification programs as well. This is Arizona. I just got an email this morning. We anticipate somewhere in the vicinity of 6,000 or 7,000 teacher vacancies in our state for the next year. That's with about 50,000 teachers in the state. But going back to that retention issue, just quickly, it turns out that if people are well prepared in pedagogy, they stay more than people who have not had good pedagogical preparation. So we're a poor city. That's what that says. What's really interesting, though, is that when you ask teachers how long they work, it turns out that over a 38-week work year, given the reports on the number of hours they work, they actually approximate, their work year approximates a standard work year of 2,087 hours. So there's one of those myths, I think, that really needs to be broken, is that teachers only work 9 months and should only make 3/4 of a salary. So how have we responded to that? So in our community, we have built a program that's now almost 20 years old that tries to create an alliance among higher education and a number of other important partners. This has been going on now, started by the university, 3 different deans, all the superintendents in the local districts have turned over that period of time, yet we persist. So I think we now have a real viable organization. We call it the Professional Preparation Board, and Renee is going to talk about that.
So imagine that you're a new dean on the job, and the president calls you into the office and says, I've been visited by area superintendents, and they're threatening not to take your students. They're threatening to pull out. There are 2 other major teacher preparation institutions in this state, Arizona State and Northern Arizona. Their preparation programs are fine, and yours are really bad. That's the danger of ignoring local needs. Our area schools and districts will not accept candidates if they're not prepared and if they act unprofessionally. We can talk about measurement, but we can also talk about what happens when our candidates get to the schools. And increasingly, area schools do not want candidates who will adversely affect their students' test scores. And so over the years, and over 3 deans, as Ron has said, understanding, improving, and monitoring our programs and our candidates' progress is an essential task and a collaborative task. So in 1999, the Professional Preparation Board was created under the leadership of Dean John Taylor. It addressed the immediate challenge of teacher and administrator preparation and quality. But it was intended to foster the collaboration and networking through regular, ongoing monthly meetings. And so we're not talking about a funded project. We're not talking about someone's pet project. We're talking about an institution that has endured and is helping us all through these challenging times. We prepare teachers in 5 colleges at the University of Arizona. All of those preparation programs are represented on the board. We have representatives from each of the local districts. In some cases, it's the superintendent. In others, it's the associate superintendent. And we also have representatives from the Arizona Department of Education. It may be one of the few times when it's okay to drive from Phoenix to Tucson, because usually we drive from Tucson to Phoenix. So we're really happy to have ADE come down. And we also have representatives from the Pima County Superintendent's Office. Our executive assistant, the intrepid Rachel Barton, is the lead staff member. And an executive team, a smaller group of a few individuals from the university and from the school districts, meet monthly to review progress, to plan agendas. The executive team is co-chaired by Ron and by a woman who is mentioned on the lead slide, Carolyn Dumler, to whom we owe an incredible debt for a lot of these ideas. She has the history. Our sessions at these executive board meetings are planning meetings, but they're also information sharing meetings. So that's where we learned just this week that the Department of Education has changed its database, and the way that schools are funded, the way they're receiving funding, is in jeopardy because some of the data have been lost. In Arizona, tracking teachers might be a dream, but it's probably a pipe dream because we simply do not have the database to do that. We also bring in state and national speakers, and we make things available on our College of Education website through podcasts. So it's really important to let you know that on our campus, parking is a premium. I'm sure that's not true on any other campus in this room. So we pay for parking. We also know that 7:15, 7:30 in the morning is early, so we buy breakfast. But we really, really try to focus collaboratively on what's happening in education in Arizona and across the nation. We also talk about what it means to be co-professionals. What is the university expecting of our candidates? And recall, we're talking about 5 colleges. And then what is it that the schools are expecting of our candidates when they arrive? How are we mentoring beginning teachers? And how are we moving toward the co-teaching model that you heard about earlier? Because in our view, and in the increasingly prevalent view of the districts, our students need to be seen as helping hands. And so a parenthetical comment here is all of our teacher preparation programs are embedded in schools, either for 3 or 4 semesters, depending on the program. Recently, we've talked about Common Core. And recall I said that the county superintendent's office was a partner. So because of those discussions, we were having professional development for teachers long before Common Core actually was in effect in the state of Arizona. So some of our schools felt that they were ahead of the curve. And then we shared numerous tales, a lot of whining, and then a lot of serious concern about the teacher evaluation policies. Is it really okay to evaluate an art teacher based on the reading scores of the teachers whose classrooms could be measured? How do you evaluate advanced placement English? Are we really asking the right thing when we look at teacher evaluation? And then when we map that back to teacher preparation programs, does this make any sense at all? The answer was a collective no. We even had a national conference on this topic, and the consensus was a national collective no. For 2015 and 2016, we have been reimagining teachers' work and the nature of schooling. We've been focusing on teacher retention. Our school partners have told us that teacher retention is the single most problem that they face. That's true statewide. It's particularly true in Tucson, where the starting salaries are as low as $32,000 a year. And for us, many of the presentations earlier are fascinating and important, but it really doesn't matter what kind of a teacher preparation program someone goes through if they don't teach. And so the issue for us is turning to what can we collectively do to increase retention. That led us to bringing Richard Ingersoll in, who focused our discussions on the importance of looking at working conditions. And working conditions is likely to be our major topic for next year. Lessons learned. It's really important to ask the right questions rather than having the questions imposed externally. And it's really important, as Ken said, to discuss these questions and possible answers or possible ways of managing the dilemmas thoughtfully and respectfully. We know, and we don't know how to achieve this, but we know that the Tucson area educators need to be paid a respectful wage and must have professional opportunities over time. We are beginning to explore some pilot projects that are not externally funded because we want them to be sustainable over time. I won't talk about them today because they're so new that I'm scared to death that they'll fail before we even get them off the ground. But we are beginning to talk with our school partners about how we can do this. We know that working conditions in Arizona need to improve. We're a multilingual area. We're also a haven for refugees. The issues of working with recent immigrants and the issues of working with multiple languages are alive and well in the Tucson area. But the last lesson learned is the one that I wish we could all take from here and that those of you who are watching would take too. We have to change the rhetoric. The rhetoric has been, teachers are important. We have processed product research. We have ethnographic research. We have survey research that says that teachers are important. And so what we need to do is criticize them. We need to talk about how bad they are. We need to talk about the bottom 5% and if we just get rid of them. This rhetoric has its toll. In the Tucson Values Teachers Survey that was on one of the earlier slides, most of the respondents said they would not recommend their children going into teaching, and parenthetically, sometimes they ask our candidates why the hell they're going into teaching. It is not a positive climate. The rhetoric has to change. Our insights. Long-term collaboration is crucial. It needs to survive leadership, it needs to survive ideology, and it needs to encourage people to discuss and to plan together. And to do that, you have to have a structure. It's got to be a structure that sustains the partnership. It has to be a structure that sustains conditions. It has to build relationships. My first year as associate dean, we faced a huge problem with one of the student teachers who we had placed, but was in a program that we did not control. It was the relationships between our college and the assistant superintendent that kept us able to place student teachers in that particular school district. And even now, as we counsel people out, and we have a very robust professional growth plan for identifying students' problems in relation to the INTESC standards, as we counsel people out, and we counsel maybe 3 or 4 out a year across all of the programs, it's the relationships that enable the cooperating teachers and the faculty to sit down together and say, how can we support this struggling student? Or how can we counsel this struggling student out? And so, as we address common concerns, we've created trust over time, and it's cyclical. As trust is created, relationships are promoted. This isn't a panacea, but as Jack noted in the very first presentation, context is everything. Yes, we prepare students from California, Illinois, New Jersey, and Texas. And as we talk with our schools and they say, why do you send us students from Illinois, California, New Jersey, and Texas? It's incumbent upon us to encourage teachers, prospective teachers from the Tucson area to go through high-quality programs and to return to the Tucson area. We feel, as a local program and a national program, it's the quality of relationships locally that enable us to study our programs, to improve our programs, and most importantly, to continue our programs. Thank you.